here's your picture. All right, so you've got a portable radio. It hits the repeater. The repeater can send the signal out to either another repeater or maybe a base station or a dispatch center. And it can send out to even another repeater, which eventually goes out and hits your mobile unit. So repeaters are going to be strategically positioned throughout response areas to make sure that the one dispatch center, because you only really want to have one of those, can reach all of the EMS units that it needs to. So there are also satellite receivers. These are additional receivers located around an area of desired radio coverage to ensure low power mobiles and portables are always in range. So they're going to be connected to the base station or repeater by telephone lines or microwave relay. So this is just another method used to increase your range. These aren't really used much anymore, at least in our area, because they're just not needed. We have enough repeaters around that the satellite receivers aren't really necessary. The next topic is a remote console. A remote console is a control console and microphone that's connected to the base station by telephone lines. So this is a physical connection, not a through-the-air connection. Although if it's microwaves, then it is through the air. It could also be through radio waves. So it could be through the air. It allows remote locations, such as hospitals, to actually use the base station. There are some special equipment, an encoder and a decoder. An encoder encodes a message and a decoder decodes the message. There's also a mobile data terminal, and this is a kind of an old picture. They're much newer these days, but the mobile data terminal is going to be basically a computer in your ambulance or fire truck. So how do you use a radio? Well, first, know what you're going to say before you start talking. Don't waste airtime. Next, don't ever transmit without first monitoring the frequency. Otherwise, you'll end up walking over, and that's a technical term, walking over somebody else. So there may be another ambulance trying to communicate with dispatch, and if you don't listen to the frequency first, especially if you're switching back from another frequency, you'll end up walking over them. And then you want to wait a few seconds after keying up the microphone before talking. Part of this is that you sometimes have to wait for the radio to hit the repeater, so you want to start transmitting before you start talking because there is some clipping associated with the receiver. So if you start talking here, and you talk and talk and talk, and you finish talking here, it may take a little bit before it hits the repeater, and so you actually only transmit this much of your message. When you're using the radio, be sure to identify yourself on every transmission. And that sounds silly, but everybody has what we kind of colloquially call your radio voice. Because your voice on the radio doesn't sound the same as it does in person. So even if you know somebody working up in the dispatch center, it may be that you don't sound the same on the radio and they can't tell what you sound like. The radios tend to make people's voices sound more similar than different. You want to speak at close range, and I would say directly across the microphone. You don't have to speak directly into the microphone. Don't yell and use your normal conversational tone and speed. I'm going to re-emphasize this part. Don't yell. You sound silly when you yell into the radio. You want to talk slowly and clearly. Again, you want to articulate what you're saying clearly and you want to be concise. Don't be long-winded. Use proper English and avoid using codes. By codes, we're talking about like 10 codes. You've heard of, 1040 or, 1073 or something like that. These are still sometimes used with police departments if they have sensitive stuff that they're trying to talk about. But we don't use that anymore. It's much easier to use plain English because then everybody understands what we're saying.